What would drive an 80-year-old to seek out the most dangerous man in the city at midnight? What desperation could possibly push a child to walk through the worst neighborhoods alone, past drug dealers and gang members, to knock on the heavily guarded gate of a cartel compound? And what kind of man would actually answer that knock? If you live in a border state like Texas or Arizona, you probably know that sometimes the most unlikely heroes emerge from the darkest places. Sometimes protection comes from the last person you would expect. The security cameras picked up the small figure before any of the guards noticed her. A little girl in a faded pink nightgown and bare feet, clutching a stuffed rabbit against her chest, standing in front of the 10-foot iron gates that protected Diego Morales from the rest of the world. She looked so tiny against the massive compound walls, like a lost kitten meowing outside a wolf's den. Diego was reviewing shipment reports in his office when his head of security, Carlos, knocked on the door. Carlos had worked for the Morales family for 15 years, had seen everything from rival cartel assassinations to federal raids, but the expression on his weathered face was something Diego had never seen before. Confusion mixed with something that might have been concern. "There is a situation at the front gate," Carlos said, his usual steady voice carrying an odd note. "A child." Diego set down his papers. At this hour, nothing about a child at his gate could be good news. Children meant complications, meant someone was using innocence as a weapon or shield. In his world, children appeared for 3 reasons. They were being threatened, they were being used, or they were already dead. What kind of situation? "She is asking to see you. Specifically, by name." Diego's blood chilled. No child should know his name, much less know where to find him. He kept his legitimate businesses completely separate from his compound, maintained multiple layers of security precisely so that innocent people could not stumble into his world. The children in his organization's territory knew him only as someone who made sure they had food and school supplies, never as someone who controlled the flow of drugs and weapons through half of Southern California. "Show me." The security monitor revealed a sight that stopped Diego's breath completely. The little girl could not have been older than 8, with long dark hair tangled around her shoulders and enormous brown eyes that seemed far too old for her face. She was not crying, was not showing any of the fear he would have expected from a child in her situation. Instead, she stood with the kind of determined stillness that spoke of desperate resolve. Diego had seen that expression before, in the mirror, the night he had decided to take over his father's organization rather than let it fall into the hands of men who would destroy everything the Morales family had built. It was the look of someone who had run out of options and decided to bet everything on one impossible chance. "Open the gate," he said quietly. Carlos turned to stare at him. "Sir, we do not know who sent her or what she might be carrying. This could be a trap. Look at her, Carlos." Diego gestured toward the monitor. "Whatever brought her here, she is not part of someone else's plan. Open the gate and bring her to the main house. Carefully, and call Maria to come down from the kitchen." Diego rarely second-guessed his instincts about people. 20 years in this business had taught him to read fear, desperation, and deception in a heartbeat. This child was desperate, certainly, but there was something else in her posture that made his chest tight with an emotion he could not immediately identify. She reminded him of his sister Isabella, who had been about the same age when she died. Isabella had carried herself with that same fierce determination, had possessed that same stubborn refusal to back down even when the world became too dangerous for someone so small. He met them in the marble foyer of his house, the same space where he conducted business with men who controlled millions of dollars in illegal enterprises. The little girl looked even smaller inside, dwarfed by the soaring ceilings and expensive artwork, but she did not seem intimidated. Instead, she examined everything with the careful attention of someone who understood that details mattered, that noticing the wrong thing or the right thing could mean the difference between safety and disaster. Maria, his housekeeper, hovered nearby with the maternal concern that made her invaluable for situations exactly like this one. Maria had raised 6 children of her own and could calm a frightened child faster than anyone Diego had ever known. "What is your name, Mija?" Maria asked gently, crouching down to the little girl's eye level. "Sofia Vasquez," the child replied, her voice steady despite her obvious exhaustion. "I need to talk to Mr. Morales. It is about my sister." Diego stepped forward, studying the girl's face carefully. Sofia Vasquez. The name meant nothing to him, but the intensity in her dark eyes suggested that his name meant everything to her. I am Diego Morales. Tell me about your sister, Sofia. She is in trouble. Sofia clutched her stuffed rabbit tighter, the first sign of the fear she was working so hard to hide. He hurts her. Tonight he had a bottle, and he was yelling and throwing things, and I heard her crying. She always tells me to hide in the closet when he gets like that, but this time was different. This time he said he was going to make her sorry for thinking she was too good for him. Diego felt the familiar cold anger settle in his chest, the same emotion that had driven him to eliminate 3 rival cartel leaders over the past year. Violence against women was one of his few absolute lines. Men who hurt women were cowards, and Diego had built his reputation on making sure cowards understood the consequences of their choices. Where is your sister now? At home. Sofia's voice finally cracked, revealing the terrified little girl beneath the determined facade. I climbed out my bedroom window after he started hitting her. I remembered you from when you came to our school last month for the book drive, and I remembered what my teacher said about how you help people in our neighborhood. Please, Mr. Morales. She is all I have. Diego looked down into Sofia's upturned face and saw his sister Isabella again. Saw the plea for protection that he had been too young and too powerless to answer 25 years ago. This time would be different. This time, he was not a helpless 13-year-old boy watching his family be destroyed by men who believed strength meant hurting those who could not fight back. Carlos, Diego said without taking his eyes off Sofia. Get the car, and call ahead to make sure we have a clear route to the Vasquez address. Sir, Carlos began, but Diego cut him off with a look. Now, Maria, can you stay with Sofia while I take care of this? I want to come with you, Sofia said quickly. She is my sister. No, Mija. Diego knelt down so he could meet her eyes directly. You did the brave thing by coming to find me. Now you need to let me do what I do best. I promise you, your sister will be safe. But I need you to stay here with Maria where I know you are safe too. Sofia studied his face for a long moment, and Diego realized she was evaluating him the same way he evaluated potential business partners. She was deciding whether or not she could trust him with the most important thing in her world. You promise you will bring her back? I promise. Sofia nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement that reminded Diego exactly why he had agreed to this insane plan. She had the kind of courage that most grown men never developed, the willingness to risk everything for someone she loved. It was the kind of loyalty Diego valued above everything else in his organization, and seeing it in an 80-year-old child made him more determined than ever to make sure her faith in him was justified. The drive to the Vasquez apartment took 12 minutes through neighborhoods that Diego controlled but rarely visited personally. These were the areas where his organization's protection mattered most, where families like Sofia's lived in the spaces between legitimate society and the criminal world that funded their safety. Diego had always maintained that distinction carefully. The people who lived under his protection deserved to sleep peacefully, deserved to believe that their children could walk to school without being recruited or threatened or worse. The apartment building was exactly what he had expected. Old but maintained, the kind of place where working families could afford to rent while they saved money for something better. The kind of place where a social worker might live while she tried to build a stable life for her orphan little sister. Diego heard the shouting before they reached the 3rd floor. A man's voice, slurred with alcohol and rage, punctuated by the sound of something being thrown against a wall. Then a woman's voice, quieter but firm, trying to de-escalate a situation that had clearly moved far beyond the possibility of peaceful resolution. Carlos positioned himself at the top of the stairs while Diego approached the apartment door. The lock had been damaged, probably forced earlier in the evening, and the door hung slightly open. Through the gap, Diego could see an overturned coffee table and scattered pieces of what had once been a lamp. Please, just leave, the woman was saying. Sofia is sleeping, and you are going to wake the whole building. Sofia is not here. You lying bitch, the man replied. Where did you send her? Did you call the cops? You think you can get me arrested just because I want what is owed to me? Diego pushed the door open and stepped into the small living room. The scene was exactly what he had expected and exactly what made his anger burn white-hot in his chest. A large man with the soft build of someone who had never worked for anything in his life stood over a young woman who who was backed against the kitchen counter. The man held a beer bottle in one hand and had obviously been using it as a weapon based on the shattered glass scattered across the floor. The woman was Sophia's sister, no question. She had the same dark hair and enormous brown eyes, though hers were currently wide with fear rather than determination. She was beautiful in the way that made Diego understand exactly why a coward like her stepfather felt entitled to possess her. She was also clearly terrified but trying to hide it, the same combination of courage and vulnerability that had driven her little sister to seek help from a stranger. Elena Vasquez, Diego said quietly. Both the woman and the man spun toward the door. Elena's expression shifted from fear to confusion to something that might have been hope. The man's expression moved from surprise to anger to the particular kind of panic that Diego recognized in men who suddenly realized they had made a very serious mistake. "Who the hell are you?" the stepfather demanded, raising the beer bottle like a weapon. "Get out of my house before I call the police." Diego smiled, the expression that his enemies had learned to fear more than his guns or his reputation. "This is not your house, and you are not going to call anyone." Elena's stepfather was clearly drunk enough to miss the danger signs that any sober person would have recognized immediately. Diego Morales did not travel alone, did not enter dangerous situations without backup, and did not make threats he was not prepared to follow through on. The stepfather was also apparently drunk enough to believe that his size advantage would matter against a man who had been surviving in this world since he was younger than Sophia. "I said get out," the stepfather repeated, taking a step toward Diego. Diego moved faster than most people expected from someone his size. 25 years of training with the best fighters money could buy had taught him that violence should be swift, decisive, and educational for anyone watching. The stepfather never got the chance to swing his improvised weapon. Diego disarmed him with one clean movement, then put him on the ground with another. The stepfather lay motionless on the broken glass, breathing but unconscious. Diego felt the familiar satisfaction of a problem efficiently solved, though he knew this particular problem was far from over. Men like Elena's stepfather never learned from a single lesson. They came back angrier and more dangerous, usually with friends who shared their belief that women were property to be controlled. Elena stared at him with an expression Diego could not immediately read. She was no longer afraid, exactly, but she was not relieved either. She looked like someone who understood that one kind of danger had just been replaced by another, possibly more dangerous kind. "Are you hurt?" Diego asked. Elena shook her head slowly. "Where is Sophia?" "She is safe. At my house. She came to find me." Elena's eyes widened. "Sophia left? At night? By herself? She was worried about you." Diego gestured toward the unconscious man on the floor. It appears her concern was justified. Elena stared down at her stepfather, then back at Diego. "I know who you are," she said quietly. "Everyone in this neighborhood knows who you are." "Then you know I am not going to let this continue," Diego replied. "Pack whatever you and Sophia need for a few days. You cannot stay here. I cannot just leave with you." Elena's voice was steady despite the impossible situation she found herself in. "I do not know you. And Sophia, she is just a little girl. She should not be exposed to." "To what?" Diego asked. "To someone who will make sure she is safe? To someone who will make sure her sister is not beaten to death by a coward who thinks his fists make him a man?" Elena flinched, and Diego realized his anger was showing more than he had intended. He had learned years ago that frightening the people he was trying to protect was counterproductive, but something about this particular situation was affecting his usual control. "I am sorry," he said more gently. "Tonight has been difficult for everyone. But Sophia risked her life to find help for you, and I promised her I would bring you back safely. Right now, the safest place for both of you is my compound until we can figure out a more permanent solution." Elena looked around the destroyed apartment, then down at her unconscious stepfather again. Diego could see her weighing options that probably all seemed impossible. Stay and risk worse violence when the stepfather woke up. Leave with a cartel leader and risk exposing her little sister to a world that no child should ever see. Trust a stranger who had just demonstrated exactly how dangerous he could be when motivated. "What did Sophia tell you?" Elena asked finally. "That you are all she has. That you protect her. That someone needs to protect you." Elena's eyes filled with tears for the first time since Diego had entered the apartment. He realized that being seen as someone worth protecting was probably not an experience she had very often. Women like Elena spent their lives taking care of other people. Social workers, older sisters, the kind of women who sacrificed their own safety to make sure everyone else was okay. She will be worried if I do not come back with you, Elena said. Yes, Diego agreed. She will be. Elena nodded once, the same decisive movement Sophia had made. Okay, let me get our things. While Elena packed, Diego called Carlos to arrange cleanup for the apartment and surveillance for the stepfather. Men like Elena's stepfather were predictable in their patterns, which made them easy to monitor and easy to eliminate when they inevitably escalated beyond what Diego was willing to tolerate. The drive back to the compound was quiet. Elena sat in the passenger seat of Diego's car, clutching a small suitcase and staring out the window at neighborhoods she had probably never seen from inside a vehicle this expensive. Diego found himself watching her reflection in the glass, studying the delicate line of her profile and the way she held herself with careful control despite everything that had happened tonight. She was beautiful, certainly, but Diego had seen beautiful women before. What caught his attention was the same quality he had noticed in Sophia, a core of strength that had not been broken despite circumstances that would have destroyed most people. Elena Vasquez was a survivor, and Diego had always respected survivors. When they arrived at the compound, Sophia was waiting in the main foyer despite Maria's obvious attempts to convince her to go to bed. She launched herself at Elena the moment they walked through the door, and Diego watched the two sisters hold each other with the kind of desperate relief that came from genuinely believing they might never see each other again. I was so scared, Sophia whispered against Elena's shoulder. I thought he was going to really hurt you this time. I am okay, Elena replied, smoothing Sophia's hair. We are both okay. Sophia pulled back to look at Diego over Elena's shoulder. Thank you, she said solemnly, for keeping your promise. You are welcome, Diego replied. Now, I think Maria has prepared rooms for both of you. Tomorrow we will figure out what comes next. As Maria led Sophia toward the guest wing, Elena lingered in the foyer. She looked around at the expensive artwork and marble floors, clearly trying to reconcile the luxury with everything she thought she knew about Diego Morales. This is not what I expected, she said quietly. What did you expect? Something more dangerous looking. Diego smiled, though without any humor. The most dangerous things rarely look the way people expect them to look. Just because my house is beautiful does not mean I am not exactly as dangerous as you have heard. Elena met his eyes directly for the first time since he had rescued her. And just because you are dangerous does not mean you are not also capable of kindness. Diego felt something shift in his chest, an unfamiliar warmth that had nothing to do with attraction and everything to do with being seen clearly by someone whose opinion somehow mattered. Elena Vasquez understood exactly who he was, understood the contradiction between the man who could destroy her stepfather without breaking a sweat and the man who had kept his promise to an 80-year-old girl. Tomorrow we will discuss your options, Diego said. Tonight, just rest. You and Sophia are safe here. Elena nodded, then surprised him by stepping closer instead of moving toward the stairs. For tonight, she said quietly, thank you. For answering Sophia's knock. For keeping your promise. For making me feel like someone worth protecting. Before Diego could respond, she was gone, following Maria's path toward the guest wing. Diego stood alone in his foyer, staring after her and trying to understand why a woman he had known for less than 3 hours felt like the missing piece of something he had not even realized was broken. In his experience, protecting people was a business transaction. He provided security in exchange for loyalty, respect, or payment. It was never personal, never emotional, never about anything more complicated than maintaining the balance of power that kept his organization strong. But watching Elena Vasquez disappear into the shadows of his house, Diego realized that some promises were more dangerous than others. Some people were worth protecting for reasons that had nothing to do with business or strategy or maintaining control. Some people were worth protecting simply because losing them would leave the world a little less bright, a little less worth fighting for. And that realization, Diego knew, was going to complicate everything. Elena woke to silence, so complete it felt unnatural. For the first time in 2 years, there was no sound of her stepfather stumbling around the apartment, no muffled crying from Sophia's room, No tension crackling through the walls like electricity before a storm. Just pure, peaceful quiet that felt almost foreign after so many months of walking on eggshells. The guest room was larger than her and Sophia's bedrooms combined, with windows that looked out over manicured gardens instead of a parking lot full of broken cars and discarded beer bottles. The bed she had slept in was more comfortable than anything she had experienced since childhood, when her parents were still alive and the world still made sense. Reality hit her like cold water as she remembered where she was and why. She was in the home of Diego Morales, a man whose name was whispered in her neighborhood with equal parts fear and respect. A man who controlled drug shipments, who commanded the loyalty of dangerous men, who had eliminated her stepfather's threat with the kind of casual efficiency that spoke of extensive practice. A man who had also kept his promise to an 80-year-old girl, who had risked his own safety to rescue a stranger, who had treated Sophia with the gentle care of someone who understood that children deserve protection above everything else. Elena had worked in social services long enough to recognize the complexity of people who lived outside the law. Some of her clients' fathers were involved in gangs. Some of the mothers worked in illegal industries, but they were still people who loved their families and wanted better lives for their children. Diego Morales might be a criminal, but he was also the reason she and Sophia were alive and safe this morning. She found Sophia in the kitchen, sitting at a breakfast counter that was bigger than their entire dining area at home. Sophia was talking animatedly to a woman Elena recognized as Maria from the night before, chattering about the paintings she had seen in the hallways and the size of the swimming pool visible through the back windows. Diego was standing at the stove, cooking what smelled like eggs and bacon, wearing jeans and a simple white t-shirt that somehow made him look more dangerous than the expensive suit he had worn the night before. Without the formal clothing, Elena could see the breadth of his shoulders, the careful way he moved that suggested he was always aware of his surroundings, the subtle scars on his hands that spoke of a life where violence was never far away. He was also humming quietly while he cooked, a Spanish lullaby that Elena recognized from her childhood. The disconnect between the domestic scene and everything she knew about Diego Morales made her feel like she was looking at an optical illusion, seeing two different pictures depending on how she focused her eyes. "Good morning," Diego said without turning around, somehow aware of her presence despite her attempts to move quietly. "Coffee is fresh, and breakfast will be ready in a few minutes." "Elena." Sophia jumped down from her stool and ran over to throw her arms around Elena's waist. "Diego is making pancakes, and he said after breakfast he would show me the horses." "Horses?" Elena looked between her sister and Diego, trying to reconcile the image of a cartel leader keeping horses with everything else she was struggling to understand about this situation. "I have a small stable," Diego explained, finally turning to face her. "Nothing elaborate, just a few horses I rescued from a situation where they were not being properly cared for." Sophia mentioned that she likes animals. The way he said rescued made Elena wonder exactly what kind of situation had required Diego Morales to intervene on behalf of horses, and what had happened to the people who had been mistreating them. She decided she probably did not want to know the details. Diego poured coffee into a mug and handed it to Elena, their fingers brushing briefly during the exchange. The contact was completely innocent, but Elena felt her skin warm where he had touched her. She told herself it was just a reaction to stress, to the strange intimacy of sharing breakfast with a man who had saved her life less than 12 hours ago. But watching Diego flip pancakes while Sophia asked him questions about the horses, Elena had to admit that her awareness of him had very little to do with stress and everything to do with the way he moved with careful grace, the way his voice gentled when he spoke to Sophia, the way he seemed to fill the enormous kitchen just by being in it. He was handsome, certainly, with the kind of dark good looks that probably made women forget to ask intelligent questions about his profession. But Elena had known plenty of handsome men who turned out to be selfish or cruel or weak when tested. What caught her attention was the competence Diego radiated, the sense that he was someone who could handle any situation that arose, someone who would never make promises he could not keep, someone who would never let the people under his protection be hurt by men who believed strength meant hurting those weaker than themselves. After breakfast, Diego did indeed show Sophia the horses. Elena followed them to the stables, watching her little sister laugh and clap her hands as a gentle mare named Luna accepted apple pieces from Sophia's small palms. It had been months since Elena had seen Sophia this relaxed, this purely happy, and the sight made her chest tight with emotions she was not ready to examine. Diego lifted Sophia onto his shoulders so she could reach high enough to pet Luna's neck, and Elena found herself staring at the careful way he supported her sister's weight, the obvious comfort Sophia felt with this dangerous stranger who had somehow become their protector overnight. "He is gentle with her," Elena said quietly when Diego set Sophia down to explore the rest of the stable. "Children should be protected, not feared," Diego replied, his voice carrying an edge that suggested personal experience. "They should feel safe enough to laugh and ask questions and trust that the adults around them will not hurt them for being curious." Elena studied his profile, noting the tension in his jaw when he spoke about protecting children. "You have experience with children who are not safe." Diego was quiet for a long moment, watching Sophia pet a small pony with obvious delight. "I had a younger sister," he said finally. "Isabella. She was about Sophia's age when she died." Elena felt her heart clench at the pain in his voice. "I am sorry. Men who hurt children," Diego continued, "men who use their size and strength to frighten and control innocent people, those men do not deserve the air they breathe. The world is better when they are removed from it." The way he said removed made Elena understand that Diego had probably eliminated more than one person who had threatened children. She should have been horrified, should have been thinking about how to get herself and Sophia away from someone capable of such violence. Instead, she found herself thinking about all the cases she had worked where children had suffered because the legal system could not or would not protect them fast enough. How many children had Diego saved with his willingness to do what social workers and police officers and judges could not do? How many families were sleeping peacefully because men like her stepfather had learned that threatening innocence came with deadly consequences? "You are not what I expected," Elena said. "What did you expect?" "Someone colder. Someone who would not notice that Sophia needed to feel safe before she could enjoy seeing the horses." Diego turned to look at her directly, and Elena felt her breath catch at the intensity in his dark eyes. "Sophia reminds me of my sister," he said quietly. "Isabella was brave like that, curious about everything, willing to trust people who proved they would not hurt her. Sophia deserves the same chance Isabella never got." Elena felt something shift in her chest, a recognition that went deeper than physical attraction or gratitude for rescue. Diego Morales was a dangerous man, certainly, but he was dangerous in service of protecting people who could not protect themselves. He was what Elena had always wished she could be, powerful enough to guarantee that the people she cared about would never have to be afraid again. When they returned to the house, Diego made lunch while Elena helped Sophia settle in for a nap. Sophia was exhausted from the excitement of the morning and the stress of the previous night, and she fell asleep almost immediately in the enormous guest bed. Elena found Diego in his study, a room lined with books that ranged from business texts to classic literature to what appeared to be poetry collections in both English and Spanish. He was reading through papers that he set aside immediately when she entered. "We should talk," Elena said. "Yes," Diego agreed. "We should." Elena took a seat across from his desk, trying to maintain some sense of professional distance despite the fact that she was wearing clothes he had provided and sleeping in his house and accepting his protection. "I need to understand what this arrangement means," she said. "For Sophia and for me." "It means you are safe," Diego replied simply. "For as long as you need to be safe." Elena shook her head. "Nothing is that simple. You do not even know us. Why would you take this kind of risk for strangers?" Sophia is 8 years old, and she walked through some of the most dangerous neighborhoods in the city at midnight because she believed I would help her. Diego's voice was quiet, but absolutely certain. "Anyone brave enough to do that deserves whatever help I can provide." "And me?" Elena asked. "What do I deserve?" "You deserve not to live in fear," Diego said. "You deserve not to have to choose between your safety and Sophia's safety. You deserve someone who will make sure you never have to face violence alone again." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes despite her efforts to remain composed. No one had ever spoken to her like that, like her safety mattered for its own sake rather than because of what she could provide for other people. As a social worker, she spent her days fighting for other people's rights. As Sophia's guardian, She spent her energy making sure her little sister had everything she needed. But no one had ever suggested that Elena herself deserved protection, deserved care, deserved someone willing to fight for her. "I work for the county social services department," Elena said, trying to regain her professional composure. "I help families navigate the system when children are at risk. I know what you do for a living, and I know it involves activities that the law considers serious crimes." "Yes," Diego agreed without hesitation. "It does." Elena had expected denial, explanations, some attempt to minimize the reality of his profession. His honest acknowledgement left her without the arguments she had been preparing. "So you understand why I cannot just ignore that and pretend this is a normal situation." "There is nothing normal about any of this," Diego said. "But abnormal does not necessarily mean wrong." Elena stared at him, trying to reconcile his matter-of-fact acceptance of moral complexity with her own years of training in systems that were supposed to be based on clear legal and ethical guidelines. In her work, she dealt with situations where the law was inadequate to protect vulnerable people, but she had always operated within the system rather than outside it. "My parents died in a car accident when Sophia was 6, Elena said, surprising herself with the admission. "I was 24, just out of graduate school, barely making enough to support myself. But I was her only family, so I became her guardian." Diego listened without interrupting, his attention focused completely on her in a way that made Elena feel like her words mattered, like her story was worth hearing. "Our stepfather came into the picture about a year later," Elena continued. "He seemed nice at first, helpful, supportive of me trying to raise Sophia while building my career. But after we moved in with him, things changed. He started drinking more, started getting angry when Sophia was too loud, or when I spent time on work instead of taking care of the house. The anger escalated," Diego said. "It always does with men like that." Elena nodded. "He never hurt Sophia directly, but he would threaten her when he wanted to control me. And he made it clear that if I left, he would make sure I lost custody of her. He had connections, people who would testify that I was unstable, unfit to raise a child. So you stayed to protect her." "I stayed because I did not have any other choice," Elena said. "The legal system moves slowly, and Sophia needed stability while I figured out how to get us out safely. But last night, when he started hitting me and saying those things about making me sorry, I realized that staying was not protecting her anymore. It was just postponing the moment when something terrible happened." Elena looked around the study, taking in the expensive furniture and original artwork, the subtle signs of wealth that came from controlling illegal enterprises. "And now I am sitting in the house of a man who solves problems by eliminating them, asking for help I have no way to repay, trying to figure out how to keep my little sister safe without compromising everything I thought I believed about right and wrong." Diego was quiet for a moment, studying her with an expression Elena could not read. "What matters more?" he asked finally. "Following rules that have failed to protect you and Sophia, or accepting help that will guarantee your safety?" Elena felt the question hit her like a physical blow, cutting through all the professional training and moral certainty she had built her adult life around. In her work, she had seen too many cases where following proper procedures had meant that children suffered while adults filled out paperwork and followed protocols that moved too slowly to prevent harm. "I do not know," Elena admitted. "I have spent my entire career believing that working within the system was the only ethical way to help people. But the system did not help us. The system would have let him kill me, while social workers and lawyers and judges debated the best way to proceed." "The system has its place," Diego said. "But sometimes people need protection that cannot wait for legal processes to run their course." Elena met his eyes, seeing something in his expression that reminded her of the social workers she respected most, the ones who were willing to bend rules when following them meant children stayed in dangerous situations. The ones who understood that sometimes protecting people required moral courage more than legal authority. "If Sophia and I stay here," Elena said slowly, "what do you expect from us?" "I expect Sophia to be a child," Diego replied. "To feel safe enough to laugh and ask questions and not worry about adult problems that are too big for her to handle. I expect you to heal from what that man did to you. To remember that you deserve kindness and respect, and someone who will stand between you and anyone who wants to hurt you." Elena felt her heart do something complicated in her chest, a flutter that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the way Diego spoke about her and Sophia like they were precious things worthy of protection. No one had ever talked about her that way, like her well-being mattered for its own sake. "And what do you get out of this arrangement?" Elena asked. Diego smiled, and Elena realized it was the first time she had seen him look genuinely happy rather than grimly determined. "I get to keep my promise to an 80-year-old girl who was brave enough to trust me with the most important thing in her world," he said. "I get to make sure that Sophia grows up believing that there are adults who will protect her when she needs protection." Elena felt tears threaten again at the simple honesty in his voice. "For now," she said quietly, "we will stay. Until we can figure out something more permanent." "Good," Diego said. "And Elena, when you are ready to figure out something more permanent, we will figure it out together. You are not alone in this anymore." Elena nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady. She stood to leave, then paused at the door of the study. "Diego?" "Yes." "Thank you," she said, "for making this feel less impossible." After Elena left, Diego sat in his study for a long time, staring at the door she had closed behind her and trying to understand what was happening to him. He had been protecting people for most of his adult life, but it had always been a business decision based on strategic considerations or organizational loyalty. This felt different. This felt personal in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. Elena Vasquez was not just another person who needed his help. She was someone who had dedicated her life to protecting vulnerable people, someone who understood the weight of being responsible for others' safety, someone who had made sacrifices he recognized because they were the same kinds of sacrifices he had made. She was also beautiful and brave and stubborn enough to challenge him about his methods while accepting his help, which created a combination that Diego found more compelling than anything he had experienced in years. He was in trouble, Diego realized. The kind of trouble that could not be solved with money or violence or strategic thinking. The kind of trouble that could only be solved by figuring out how to deserve the trust that Sophia had placed in him, and the cautious hope he had seen in Elena's eyes when she agreed to stay. The kind of trouble that might turn out to be worth everything it was going to cost him. Elena woke to the sound of crying from the room next door. For a moment, disorientation clouded her thoughts as she tried to remember where she was and why Sophia was not in the bed next to hers. Then reality crashed back. The compound, Diego Morales, the safety that came with a price she was still trying to calculate. She found Sophia curled in a ball in the center of the enormous guest bed, tears streaming down her face as she clutched her stuffed rabbit. Elena gathered her little sister into her arms, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settle around her shoulders like a heavy cloak. "Shoo, Mija," Elena whispered, stroking Sophia's hair. "You are safe. We are both safe." "I had a bad dream," Sophia sobbed against Elena's shoulder. "He was there, and he was hitting you again, and this time you could not get away, and I could not find help, and—" "It was just a dream," Elena said firmly, though her own heart was racing with memories of the previous night. "He cannot hurt us here. Diego promised we would be safe, remember? But what if he finds us?" Sophia pulled back to look at Elena with eyes that were far too old for her 80-year-old face. "What if Diego decides he does not want to help us anymore?" Elena felt her chest tighten at the fear in her sister's voice. Sophia had already lost too much in her young life, had learned too early that adults could not always be trusted to keep their promises. The fact that she was questioning Diego's protection meant she was starting to understand just how precarious their situation really was. "Diego is not going to change his mind," Elena said with more confidence than she felt. "He made a promise to you, and I think he is the kind of man who keeps his promises." A soft knock at the door interrupted them, and Elena looked up to see Diego standing in the doorway. He had clearly been awake despite the late hour, wearing jeans and a dark t-shirt that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. His hair was slightly mussed, and Elena found herself wondering if he had been unable to sleep or if Sophia's crying had woken him. "Is everything okay?" Diego asked quietly, his attention focused on Sophia with the same careful concern Elena had noticed from the beginning. "Bad dreams," Elena explained, feeling strangely intimate sharing this domestic crisis with a man she barely knew. "She is worried about our stepfather finding us." Diego stepped into the room, moving slowly so as not to frighten Sophia further. "May I?" he asked, gesturing toward the chair beside the bed. Elena nodded, curious to see how Diego would handle a frightened child. In her experience, Men who wielded power through violence often had no patience for the messy emotions that came with caring for others. Sophia, Diego said gently, sitting down so that he was at her eye level. Tell me about your dream. Sophia studied his face for a moment, then seemed to decide that his question was genuine rather than dismissive. He was in our old apartment, and Elena was trying to get away from him, but he kept grabbing her and hurting her. And I was trying to call for help, but no one would come, and then I woke up, but I was still scared. That sounds very frightening, Diego said seriously. Dreams like that happen sometimes when we have been through something scary in real life. Your mind is trying to make sense of what happened. Elena watched Diego with growing amazement as he spoke to Sophia with the kind of patient understanding she had rarely seen from anyone outside her professional circles. He was not minimizing her fears or telling her to be brave. Instead, he was acknowledging the reality of her trauma while offering comfort. But Sophia, Diego continued, I want you to remember something important. Dreams cannot hurt you, and the man who scared you cannot reach you here. My house has security that makes it very difficult for unwanted visitors to get inside. And even if someone tried, I would stop them before they could hurt you or your sister. How do you know? Sophia asked, her voice small but curious. Because protecting people is what I do, Diego replied. It is my job and my responsibility, and I am very good at my job. Do you remember how I helped you last night when you came to find me? Sophia nodded. Well, helping you did not stop just because you are safe now, Diego said. I am still helping you by making sure you stay safe. And I will keep helping you for as long as you need me to. Elena felt something shift in her chest as she listened to Diego comfort her sister. There was no impatience in his voice, no suggestion that Sophia's fears were unreasonable or inconvenient. Instead, he spoke to her like her feelings mattered, like her safety was genuinely important to him. Thank you, Sophia whispered. You are welcome, Diego replied. Now, do you think you might be able to sleep if Elena stays with you for a while? Sophia looked at Elena hopefully, and Elena nodded immediately. Of course, Mija. I will stay right here until you fall asleep. As Diego stood to leave, Sophia surprised everyone by reaching out to catch his hand. Mr. Diego, will you tell me about your horses tomorrow? The real story about how you rescued them? Diego's expression softened in a way that made Elena's heart do something complicated. Of course, he said. I will tell you all about Luna and how she came to live here. After Sophia finally fell back asleep, Elena found herself unable to return to her own room. Instead, she wandered through the quiet hallways of Diego's house, trying to process everything she was feeling about the man who had become their unlikely protector. She found him in the kitchen, sitting at the breakfast counter with a cup of coffee and what appeared to be security reports spread out in front of him. He looked up when she entered, his dark eyes immediately alert in a way that reminded Elena that Diego Morales had not survived in his dangerous world by being careless about potential threats. Could not sleep either? Diego asked, closing the file he had been reading and giving her his full attention. Too much to think about, Elena replied, accepting the cup of coffee he poured for her without being asked. I keep trying to understand how we ended up here, how everything changed so completely in the space of one night. Diego was quiet for a moment, studying her face in the soft kitchen lighting. Sometimes change happens all at once, he said finally. Sometimes you go years living the same life, making the same choices, and then something happens that forces you to recognize that the life you were living was not actually working. Elena felt the truth of that statement hit her like a physical blow. She had spent 2 years telling herself that staying with her stepfather was the responsible choice, the safe choice. The choice that protected Sophia from the uncertainty of starting over. But last night had forced her to admit that she had been protecting Sophia from the wrong things while exposing her to dangers that could have been far worse. You are not what I expected, Elena said, echoing her earlier comment, but meaning it differently this time. What did you expect? Someone who would see Sophia's nightmares as an inconvenience. Someone who would not take the time to actually listen to an 80-year-old's fears. Diego's expression darkened slightly, and Elena realized she had touched on something personal. Children's fears are never inconvenient, he said quietly. They are usually based on very real experiences with adults who failed to protect them. Elena waited, sensing that Diego was deciding whether or not to share something important. My sister Isabella, Diego said finally, she used to have nightmares too. After our father died, and our mother remarried. Our stepfather was not physically abusive, but he made it clear that children were expected to be seen and not heard, that our emotional needs were less important than his convenience. Elena felt her heart clench at the pain in Diego's voice. What happened to her? Isabella was killed when she was 9, Diego said, his voice carefully controlled in a way that suggested enormous effort. She was in the wrong place when rival cartel members decided to send my biological father a message. They did not care that she was just a little girl playing in a park. To them, she was collateral damage. Elena set down her coffee cup with shaking hands. Diego, I am so sorry. Diego looked at her directly, and Elena saw in his eyes the same fierce protectiveness she had noticed when he spoke to Sophia. That is why children's safety matters more than anything else to me, he said. That is why I will do whatever it takes to make sure Sophia never has to be afraid again. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes as she finally understood the depth of Diego's commitment to protecting them. This was not charity or strategy or even simple kindness. This was personal for him in a way that made their safety more important than his own convenience or comfort. I can see why Sophia trusts you, Elena said quietly. You understand what it feels like to be powerless to protect someone you love. Diego nodded, then seemed to realize how much he had revealed. Elena could see him pulling back slightly, returning to the careful control that probably served him well in his professional life. But the moment of vulnerability had changed something between them. Elena found herself really looking at Diego for the first time since arriving at his compound, seeing past the dangerous reputation and expensive clothes to the man who carried guilt for a sister he could not save, who had built his adult life around making sure other children never experienced what Isabella had suffered. Diego was not just handsome and powerful and willing to protect them. He was someone who understood loss, who had turned his own pain into a commitment to preventing others from experiencing the same trauma. He was someone who could comfort a frightened child at 3 in the morning without making it seem like an inconvenience. He was someone Elena was beginning to care about in ways that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with recognition of a kindred spirit. Elena realized Diego was watching her with an intensity that made her skin warm despite the late hour and the serious nature of their conversation. There was something in his expression that looked like the same awareness she was feeling, the same recognition that whatever was developing between them was becoming more complicated than simple protection and gratitude. Elena, Diego said quietly, yes, you should know that having you here, having Sophia here, it is not just about keeping a promise anymore. What is it about? Diego was quiet for a long moment, and Elena could see him weighing his words carefully. It is about wanting to be the kind of man who deserves the trust you have placed in me, he said finally. It is about remembering what it feels like to have someone to protect who matters more than business or strategy or maintaining control. Elena felt her breath catch at the honesty in his voice. She should have been worried about the implications of what he was saying, should have been thinking about all the reasons why developing feelings for Diego Morales was dangerous and complicated and potentially devastating for both her and Sophia. Instead, she found herself stepping closer to him, drawn by the vulnerability she could see beneath his carefully maintained composure. Diego, she began, though she was not entirely sure what she intended to say. Before either of them could speak again, alarms began blaring throughout the house. Diego was on his feet instantly, his entire demeanor shifting from gentle vulnerability to lethal alertness in the space of a heartbeat. Stay here, Diego commanded, his voice carrying an authority that Elena found herself obeying automatically. Do not leave this room until I come back for you. Diego disappeared through the kitchen door, and Elena heard the sound of running footsteps and shouted commands in Spanish echoing through the hallways. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she realized that their sanctuary was under attack, that someone had found them despite Diego's promises of security. Through the kitchen windows, Elena could see flashes of light that might have been gunfire, could hear the roar of multiple vehicles approaching the compound at high speed. She thought about Sophia sleeping in the guest room, thought about how terrified her little sister would be if she woke up to the sound of violence, and made a decision that probably violated every instruction Diego had given her. Elena ran through the house toward the guest wing, staying low and avoiding windows as Diego's security team moved through the hallways with military precision. She found Sophia awake and crying in the guest bedroom, too frightened to move from the safety of the bed. Elena. Sophia threw herself into Elena's arms. What is happening? Why are there loud noises? Elena held her sister tightly, trying to project calm despite her own terror. There are some bad people outside, but Diego's men are handling it. We are going to stay right here where it is safe, okay? The sounds of conflict seemed to go on forever, though Elena realized it was probably only a few minutes before everything went quiet. When Diego finally appeared in the guest room doorway, he looked grimly satisfied but uninjured. It is over, Diego said quietly. You are both safe. Who is it? Elena asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Your stepfather, Diego confirmed. He brought friends this time. Gang members from the east side who were stupid enough to believe they could breach my security. Elena felt her blood run cold. Is he? He is alive, Diego said, anticipating her question. Badly injured, but alive. His friends were not as fortunate. Elena should have felt horrified by Diego's matter-of-fact delivery of information about men dying outside his home. Instead, she felt a fierce satisfaction that the people who had tried to reach Sophia, who had tried to bring violence into the one place where her sister felt safe, had failed completely. What happens now? Elena asked. Now your stepfather understands that threatening you comes with consequences he cannot survive, Diego replied. He will not be a problem again. Elena nodded, realizing that whatever moral complexity she had been struggling with regarding Diego's methods had been permanently resolved by watching him protect them from immediate danger. The legal system had failed to keep her stepfather away from them. Diego's system had stopped him decisively. Sophia tugged on Diego's shirt to get his attention. Mr. Diego? Are the bad people gone forever now? Forever, Diego confirmed, kneeling down to Sophia's eye level. You will never have to be afraid of them again. As Diego helped them get settled back into bed, Elena found herself watching the careful way he moved around her and Sophia, the way he made sure they felt safe despite everything that had just happened. When he bent to kiss Sophia's forehead goodnight, Elena felt something warm and dangerous unfurl in her chest. She was falling for Diego Morales, Elena realized. Falling for his gentleness with children, his willingness to protect people who could not protect themselves, his ability to be both deadly and tender depending on what the situation required. She was falling for a man who could eliminate threats without hesitation and then comfort a frightened little girl with the patience of someone who understood that healing took time. It was dangerous and complicated and probably the worst possible timing, but Elena could no longer deny what was happening to her heart. Diego lingered in the doorway after Sophia fell asleep again, and Elena joined him in the hallway. Neither of them spoke for a moment, both processing everything that had changed in the space of a few hours. Thank you, Elena said finally, for protecting us, for making sure Sophia could go back to sleep feeling safe. You do not need to thank me for protecting you, Diego replied quietly. Protecting you is not a favor I am doing for you. It is something I need to do for myself. Elena looked up into his dark eyes and saw her own complicated feelings reflected there. Diego was struggling with the same recognition she was experiencing, the same understanding that whatever was developing between them was becoming more important than either of them had planned. Elena, Diego said quietly, yes, tomorrow, when things are calmer, we need to talk about what this means. What we mean. Elena nodded, her heart racing at the promise in his voice. Tomorrow, she agreed. But as Diego disappeared toward his own room, Elena stood in the hallway for a long time, trying to understand how her life had become so completely different from anything she had ever imagined. 3 days ago, she had been a social worker trying to protect her little sister from an increasingly dangerous situation. Tonight, she was falling in love with a man who could start wars or end them depending on his mood, a man who had just proved that he would kill to keep her and Sophia safe. Tomorrow, Elena realized, everything was going to change again. And for the first time since her parents died, that possibility felt more exciting than terrifying. Elena woke to the sound of Sophia's laughter echoing through the corridors, a sound that had become increasingly common over the past week. For the first time since their parents' death, Sophia was behaving like a normal 80-year-old child instead of a miniature adult worried about grown-up problems. She was sleeping through the night without nightmares, asking endless questions about everything she saw, and treating Diego's compound like the adventure she had never been allowed to experience. Elena found them in the garden, Sophia sitting cross-legged on a blanket, while Diego showed her how to braid Luna's mane. The sight should have been heartwarming, but instead Elena felt a spike of panic watching her little sister gaze up at Diego with obvious adoration. Sophia had lost too much already. Her parents, her sense of security, her childhood innocence about the world being a safe place. Elena could not bear the thought of Sophia losing someone else she had learned to love, especially someone whose profession made loss an occupational hazard. "Look, Elena," Sophia called out when she noticed her sister approaching. "Diego is teaching me how to take care of horses. He says if I practice every day, maybe I can help him with all the horses in the stable." "That is wonderful, Mija," Elena said, forcing enthusiasm into her voice while her stomach twisted with worry. "Elena, Diego said it would be okay if I called him Papa Diego," Sophia continued, her voice bright with excitement. "Since I do not have a papa anymore, and he takes such good care of us. Would that be okay?" Elena felt the world tilt sideways as Sophia's innocent request hit her like a physical blow. She looked at Diego, who was watching her with an expression that was carefully neutral but somehow expectant, like he was waiting to see how she would handle this development. That is something we should talk about later, Mija," Elena managed. "Why do not you finish braiding Luna's mane while I speak with Diego for a minute?" Sophia nodded happily, completely unaware of the tension that had suddenly filled the garden like an approaching storm. Elena waited until they were out of Sophia's hearing range before turning to face Diego with an expression that was probably not as composed as she intended. "We need to talk," Elena said quietly. "Yes," Diego agreed. "We do." Elena waited until they were in Diego's study with the door closed before letting her carefully controlled composure crack. "She cannot get attached to you like this," Elena said, her voice sharper than she had intended. "Sophia has already lost too much. She cannot afford to lose someone else she has learned to love." Diego closed the study door behind them, then turned to face Elena with an expression that was more hurt than angry. "Who says she is going to lose me?" "Your profession says so," Elena replied, pacing across the room because standing still felt impossible. "You live a dangerous life, Diego. People in your line of work do not always come home at night. Sophia has already buried her parents. I cannot let her fall in love with someone who might not survive to see her grow up." Diego was quiet for a moment, and Elena could see him weighing his words carefully. "You are right that my life involves risks," he said finally. "But you are wrong if you think I would let anything happen to Sophia. Or to you. You cannot guarantee that," Elena said, feeling tears threaten despite her attempts to remain rational. "No one can guarantee that. People die, Diego. People leave. People who promise they will always be there disappear anyway, and children like Sophia are left to pick up the pieces." Elena realized she was no longer talking only about Sophia's attachment to Diego. She was talking about her own growing feelings, her own fear of caring about someone whose survival was never guaranteed. "This is about more than Sophia, is it not?" Diego asked quietly. Elena stopped pacing and turned to face him. "Of course it is about Sophia. She is my responsibility. Protecting her is my job." "That is not what I meant, and you know it," Diego said. "This is about you being afraid to care about me." Elena felt her carefully constructed arguments crumble under the weight of Diego's direct observation. She had been telling herself that her concerns were purely practical, based on legitimate worries about Sophia's emotional well-being. But Diego was right. Her panic about Sophia, calling him Papa, had as much to do with her own feelings as it did with protecting her little sister. Elena was terrified of falling in love with Diego Morales. She was terrified of needing someone whose life was defined by violence and uncertainty. She was terrified of building a future around a man who might not survive to share it with them. "I cannot do this," Elena said, her voice breaking despite her efforts to maintain control. "I cannot let myself care about you when caring about you means living in constant fear that something will happen to you." Diego stepped closer, and Elena could smell his cologne, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "You are already caring about me," he said quietly. "The question is whether you are brave enough to admit it." Elena looked up into his dark eyes and felt her resolve wavering. Diego was right, as usual. She was already falling for him, had been falling for him since the moment he had comforted Sophia's nightmares with the patience of someone who understood childhood trauma from personal experience. But admitting her feelings would mean accepting the reality of his world, accepting the possibility of loss that came with loving someone whose enemies would not hesitate to eliminate him if given the opportunity. I have already lost everyone I ever loved except Sophia, Elena whispered. My parents, my sense of security, my belief that good people are always protected from bad things. I cannot survive losing you too. Diego reached up to cup Elena's face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she had not realized were falling. You are not going to lose me, he said firmly. I have survived in this world for 20 years by being smarter and more careful than my enemies. I am not going anywhere. You cannot promise that, Elena repeated. You are right, Diego said. I cannot promise that nothing will ever happen to me, but I can promise that I will do everything in my power to come home to you and Sophia every night. I can promise that protecting both of you is more important to me than any business deal or territorial dispute or rival organization. Elena felt something break open in her chest at the certainty in Diego's voice. He was not offering her false assurances or empty promises. Instead, he was offering her honesty about the risks and absolute commitment to minimizing them. Elena, Diego continued, I need you to know that this stopped being about keeping a promise to Sophia days ago. This became about you, about the way you make me want to be better than I thought I could be, about the way you look at me like I am worth caring about despite everything you know about what I do. Elena felt her breath catch as Diego voiced the same recognition she had been fighting against for days. Whatever was happening between them had moved far beyond gratitude or convenience or even protection. This was about two people who had both learned to survive by being careful and self-reliant, discovering that they did not want to be alone anymore. I am falling in love with you, Diego said quietly. I am falling in love with your courage and your dedication to protecting Sophia and the way you challenge me to think about right and wrong in ways that matter more than simple profit and loss. Elena looked up into his eyes and saw her own feelings reflected there, the same combination of desire and fear and hope that had been keeping her awake at night. Diego Morales was dangerous and complicated and completely wrong for someone who had spent her life working within legal systems designed to help people through proper channels. He was also gentle with children and protective of people who could not protect themselves and willing to risk his own safety for an 80-year-old girl who had knocked on his door at midnight asking for help. Elena rose up on her toes and kissed him. The kiss was supposed to be an answer to his declaration, a way of communicating what she was not yet brave enough to say out loud. But the moment Diego's lips touched hers, Elena realized that kissing Diego Morales was nothing like the careful, controlled affection she had experienced with other men. This was fire and need and recognition all tangled together. This was Diego's hands threading through her hair while she pressed closer to him, desperate to eliminate any space between them. This was months of suppressed attraction and days of growing emotional connection, finally finding physical expression. When they finally broke apart, Elena was breathing hard and Diego's eyes were dark with desire that made her skin warm all over. Elena, Diego said quietly. I know, Elena replied, understanding what he was asking without needing him to voice the question. I am scared too, but I am more scared of walking away from this, from you, than I am of staying and figuring out how to make it work. Diego smiled, and Elena realized it was the first time she had seen him look genuinely happy rather than grimly determined or carefully controlled. Good, he said, because I am not letting you go anywhere. Elena was about to respond when Diego's phone buzzed with an incoming message. She watched his expression shift from tender to alert as he read whatever information had just been delivered. What is it? Elena asked, though she suspected from Diego's suddenly tense posture that it was not good news. Intelligence from one of my contacts, Diego said, his voice taking on the clipped efficiency she had learned to recognize when he was handling business problems. Your stepfather survived the attack on the compound, but he did not learn from it. Instead, he contacted the Herrera organization with an offer to trade information about my security protocols for their help eliminating me. Elena felt her blood run cold. The Herrera organization was one of the rival cartels she had heard whispered about in her neighborhood, the kind of people who left bodies in public places as warnings to anyone who challenged their authority. What kind of information could he possibly have? Elena asked. Enough to be useful, Diego replied grimly. He was in this house for months, had access to Sophia when she was not being carefully supervised. He knows routines, knows which security measures protect the family areas versus the business areas. Elena sank into one of the leather chairs in Diego's study, trying to process the implications of what he was telling her. Her stepfather was not just seeking revenge anymore. He was actively working to destroy the man who had protected them, using knowledge he had gained from living with Sophia to do it. What does this mean for us? Elena asked quietly. It means the Herreras will move against me within the next few days, Diego said. And it means you and Sophia need to be somewhere else when they do. Elena felt panic rise in her chest like floodwater. You want us to leave? I want you to be safe, Diego corrected. There is a difference. Elena stood up, pacing across the study because sitting still had become impossible. No, she said firmly. We are not running away. Elena, this is not a discussion, Diego said, his voice taking on the authoritative tone she imagined he used when giving orders to his organization. The Herreras have resources and manpower that make them extremely dangerous. I need to focus on eliminating this threat without worrying about whether you and Sophia are caught in the crossfire. Elena stopped pacing and turned to face Diego with an expression that was probably more defiant than wise. You just told me you love me, she said. You just asked me to trust you with everything I care about. And now, at the first sign of real danger, you want me to run away? This is real danger, Diego replied. This is not like your stepfather showing up with a few gang members. This is a coordinated attack by people who have been planning my elimination for years. Elena felt something crystallize in her chest, a certainty that surprised her with its strength. Then we face it together, she said quietly. Sophia and I are not going anywhere. Elena, Diego began. No, Elena interrupted. You said protecting us was more important to you than any business deal or territorial dispute. You said you would do everything in your power to come home to us every night. That means we are in this together, all of it, including the parts that are dangerous and complicated. Diego stared at her for a long moment, and Elena could see him weighing his desire to keep them safe against his recognition that sending them away might actually make things worse. If you stay, Diego said finally, you follow my instructions exactly. No arguments, no second-guessing, no attempts to help with situations you do not understand. If we stay, Elena corrected, we work together to keep Sophia safe while you handle the Herreras. I trust you to know how to fight this kind of war, but you trust me to know how to take care of my sister during it. Diego nodded slowly. Together, he agreed. Elena stepped closer to him, rising up on her toes to kiss him again, softer this time, but with the same underlying intensity. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. I am not going anywhere, she whispered. We are not going anywhere. You are stuck with us, Diego Morales. Diego's smile was fierce and tender at the same time. Good, he said, because I was not planning to let you leave anyway. As they stood together in Diego's study, Elena realized that everything had changed again in the space of a single conversation. She was no longer just someone Diego was protecting out of obligation to Sophia. She was someone he loved, someone whose safety mattered to him for reasons that had nothing to do with promises made to 80-year-old girls. And she was no longer just grateful for his protection. She was committed to building something real with him, something that could survive the dangers of his world because it was based on honesty about what those dangers meant. The Herreras were coming, Elena knew. Her stepfather had given them information that would make Diego's job of protecting everyone more difficult and more dangerous than it had ever been before. But for the first time since arriving at Diego's compound, Elena was not afraid of what came next. She was ready to fight for the life she was building with Diego and Sophia. She was ready to prove that love could be stronger than fear, even in a world where violence was never more than a heartbeat away. Even in a world where tomorrow was never guaranteed but had to be fought for, one dangerous day at a time. Elena woke to the sound of gunfire. For a split second, disorientation clouded her thoughts as her brain tried to process the staccato bursts of automatic weapons echoing through the compound. Then training from her social work crisis management courses kicked in, and she was moving before conscious thought could slow her down. Sophia was in the next room, probably terrified and confused by sounds that no child should ever have to hear. Elena grabbed her robe and ran through the connecting doorway, finding her little sister huddled under the blankets with her stuffed rabbit clutched against her chest. "Elena, what is happening?" Sophia whispered, her voice small and frightened in a way that made Elena's heart clench with protective fury. "Bad people are trying to get into the house," Elena said, forcing calm into her voice while her mind raced through possibilities. "But Diego and his men are stopping them. We need to go to the safe room like Diego showed us, remember?" Sophia nodded, though Elena could see tears tracking down her cheeks. During their tour of the compound several days ago, Diego had shown them the reinforced safe room in the basement level, explaining that it was equipped with communication equipment and enough supplies to last for days if necessary. Elena had hoped they would never need to use it. Elena grabbed the emergency bag Diego had insisted she keep packed, then lifted Sophia into her arms despite the fact that her sister was getting too big to carry easily. Speed mattered more than convenience right now. The hallways of the compound were controlled chaos as Diego's security team moved with military precision toward defensive positions. Elena caught glimpses of men in tactical gear, carrying weapons that looked like they belonged in war zones rather than residential buildings. These were not the casual bodyguards she had imagined when Diego spoke about his organization. These were professional soldiers. Carlos appeared at Elena's side as she reached the stairway leading to the basement level. "The safe room, now," he said urgently. "Do not come out until Diego or I personally come to get you." "Carlos," Elena said quickly, grabbing his arm before he could disappear back into the organized mayhem. "How many?" 15 vehicles, Carlos replied grimly. "Professional coordination. They know our standard protocols." Elena felt her blood chill as she realized the full implications of what Carlos was telling her. This was not a random attack or an opportunistic strike by rivals looking to test Diego's defenses. This was a carefully planned assault using intelligence that could only have come from someone with intimate knowledge of the compound's security measures. Her stepfather had kept his word to the Herreras. He had given them everything they needed to breach what should have been an impregnable fortress. Elena locked herself and Sophia into the safe room, a windowless concrete bunker equipped with monitors that showed feeds from security cameras positioned throughout the compound. She could watch the battle unfolding above them, while staying hidden from the violence that was determining their future. What Elena saw through those monitors changed her understanding of Diego Morales completely. She had known intellectually that Diego was a cartel leader, that he commanded dangerous men and controlled illegal enterprises. But watching him coordinate the defense of his compound, Elena realized she had never truly comprehended what that meant in practical terms. This was Diego in his element, moving through his organization with absolute authority and deadly precision. He was not just giving orders. He was strategically analyzing weaknesses in the attacker's formations, repositioning his men to maximize their advantages, making split-second tactical decisions that meant the difference between survival and destruction. Elena watched him appear on different camera feeds as he moved through the compound, always exactly where he needed to be when his men needed leadership most. She saw him eliminate 3 attackers personally, while coordinating radio communications with teams positioned throughout the building. This was the man her stepfather had thought he could destroy by sharing security information with his enemies. This was the man who had survived 20 years in a world where weakness was eliminated quickly and brutally. Elena had fallen in love with Diego's gentleness, his protectiveness, his careful attention to Sophia's emotional needs. But watching him fight for their survival, she realized she was also falling in love with his competence, his unwavering determination to protect what belonged to him, his willingness to do whatever necessary to keep his family safe. Because that was what they had become, Elena realized. Family. Not just people he was protecting out of obligation or kindness, but people whose safety was worth killing for. The battle seemed to last hours, though Elena knew from the timestamps on the security feeds that only 25 minutes had passed when the gunfire finally stopped. She could see Diego's men securing the perimeter while medical teams attended to wounded defenders. The attack had been repelled, but Elena could also see that several of Diego's men would not be coming home to their own families tonight. Elena was beginning to think the worst was over when one of the monitors showed a figure moving through corridors that should have been empty. Her stepfather, somehow separated from the main attacking force, was making his way toward the family areas of the compound with single-minded determination. He was heading for the safe room. Elena's blood turned to ice as she realized her stepfather must have known about the safe room's location from his months of living with Sophia. He had probably given the Herreras detailed intelligence about the compound's layout, but kept this particular piece of information for himself. He was coming for Sophia personally. Elena watched the monitors as her stepfather bypassed Diego's security teams by using service corridors that only someone with intimate knowledge of the building would know existed. He was injured, bleeding from what appeared to be a shoulder wound, but moving with the desperate focus of someone who had nothing left to lose. Elena tried the radio connection to Diego's team, but got only static in response. Either the equipment was damaged or her stepfather had somehow disrupted communications before beginning his personal assault on their hiding place. Sophia was sitting on the floor of the safe room playing with her rabbit, blissfully unaware that the man who had terrorized her for months was approaching their last sanctuary with what appeared to be enough explosives to breach the reinforced door. Elena made a decision that probably violated every instruction Diego had given her about staying hidden until the all-clear signal. She was not going to let her stepfather reach Sophia. Elena kissed the top of Sophia's head, then moved to the weapons locker Diego had shown her during their tour of the safe room. She had never fired a gun in her life, but her stepfather did not know that. Sometimes the threat of violence was as effective as violence itself. "Mija," Elena said quietly, "I need you to hide behind the supply cabinet and stay very quiet no matter what happens, okay? Do not come out until Diego comes to get you." "Elena, where are you going?" Sophia asked, her voice filled with the kind of immediate panic that came from having learned too young that adults sometimes left and never came back. "I am going to make sure the bad man cannot hurt you," Elena said firmly. "I will not let anyone hurt you ever again, I promise." Before Sophia could protest, Elena slipped out of the safe room and locked the reinforced door behind her. If her stepfather wanted to reach Sophia, he would have to go through Elena first. Elena positioned herself at the end of the corridor leading to the safe room, holding Diego's backup pistol with both hands the way she had seen police officers do in movies. She had no idea if she would actually be able to pull the trigger if necessary, but her stepfather did not need to know about her inexperience with firearms. When her stepfather rounded the corner, Elena was waiting for him. He looked exactly as pathetic as she remembered, a large man who used his size to intimidate people smaller and weaker than himself. The shoulder wound had left him pale and unsteady, but the rage in his eyes was more intense than anything Elena had seen during their worst confrontations. Well, her stepfather said, his voice slurred with pain and whatever substances he had been using to maintain consciousness. "Little Elena, playing with guns now. You always did think you were smarter than everyone else. Smart enough to know you are not getting anywhere near Sophia," Elena replied, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. Her stepfather laughed, a sound completely devoid of humor. "You think that toy is going to stop me? You think you have the guts to actually use it?" Elena felt something cold and determined settle in her chest as she looked at the man who had made Sophia's life a nightmare for months, who had hit Elena hard enough to leave bruises that took weeks to heal, who had threatened to destroy their small family because his ego could not tolerate rejection. "Try me," Elena said quietly. Her stepfather must have heard something in her voice that convinced him she was serious, because his expression shifted from mockery to something that looked like genuine concern for his own safety. "You are going to pay for what you did," her stepfather said, raising what appeared to be a small explosive device. "You and that cartel boyfriend and the little brat who thinks she is too good for her own family." Elena felt rage burn through her like fire as her stepfather threatened Sophia. This was the man who had driven an 80-year-old child to walk through dangerous neighborhoods at midnight seeking help from strangers. This was the man who had taught Sophia to hide in closets when adults argued, who had made a little girl believe that love came with violence. Elena was about to respond when she heard footsteps behind her stepfather. Diego appeared in the corridor like a deadly shadow, moving with the same lethal precision she had watched on the security monitors. Elena had never been more grateful to see anyone in her entire life. Her stepfather spun toward the new threat, but Diego was already moving. Elena closed her eyes as the confrontation ended exactly as she had known it would from the moment Diego entered the corridor. When she opened her eyes again, her stepfather was no longer a threat to anyone. Diego crossed the corridor in 2 steps. pulling Elena against his chest with hands that were shaking slightly despite his outward composure. "Are you hurt?" he asked urgently, his voice rough with emotion. "I am okay," Elena said, though she was not entirely sure that was true. Her legs felt unsteady and her heart was racing with adrenaline that had nowhere to go now that the immediate danger was over. "Sophia is in the safe room," Elena continued. "She is scared but unharmed." Diego held her for a moment longer, then pulled back to look at her with an expression that was fierce with something Elena could not immediately identify. "You came out here to protect her," Diego said. "You put yourself between Sophia and a man with explosives because you would not let him reach her." Elena nodded, not trusting her voice to remain steady if she tried to speak. "Elena," Diego said quietly, "I love you. I love your courage and your refusal to let anyone hurt the people you care about, and the way you make protecting Sophia look like the most important job in the world." Elena felt tears start despite her efforts to maintain control. "I love you too," she said, the words coming easier than she had expected. "I love you for keeping your promise to Sophia, for making her feel safe enough to laugh again, for being someone worth trusting with everything I care about." Diego kissed her then, hard and desperate and full of relief that they had all survived what could have been the end of everything they were building together. When they broke apart, Elena could hear Sophia calling for them from inside the safe room. Diego moved to unlock the reinforced door, and Sophia flew into Elena's arms with the kind of desperate relief that made Elena's chest tight with love for her brave little sister. "Is it over?" Sophia asked, looking between Elena and Diego with eyes that were too old for her 80-year-old face. "It is over," Diego confirmed, kneeling down so he was at Sophia's eye level. "The bad man cannot hurt you anymore. No one can hurt you anymore." Sophia looked at Diego with an expression that was somehow both young and ancient. "Papa Diego," she said quietly, "are you going to stay with us forever now?" Elena felt her breath catch as Sophia voiced the question Elena had not been brave enough to ask. Diego looked at Elena over Sophia's head, his dark eyes holding a question that made Elena's heart race with hope. "Sophia," Diego said gently, "how would you feel if Elena and I got married? If I became your papa for real, and we all lived together as a real family?" Sophia's face lit up with joy so pure it made Elena's eyes fill with tears again. "Really?" she asked, looking back and forth between Elena and Diego. "We could all stay together forever?" Elena looked at Diego, seeing in his expression the same hope and determination that had driven him to protect them from the beginning. But now it was about more than protection. Now it was about love and commitment and building something permanent together despite all the reasons why it should have been impossible. "Yes," Elena said quietly. "If you want that, Mija, then yes. We can all stay together forever." Sophia clapped her hands together with delight, then threw her arms around both Elena and Diego in an embrace that felt like coming home after years of wandering. As Elena stood in the basement corridor of a cartel compound, holding her little sister while the man she loved planned their future together, she realized that everything she thought she knew about safety and danger and right and wrong had been completely transformed. Diego Morales lived in a world where violence was never more than a heartbeat away, where enemies could appear without warning, where survival required constant vigilance and the willingness to eliminate threats before they could grow stronger. But Diego's world was also a place where 80-year-old girls could sleep peacefully without nightmares, where families were protected by someone with both the power and the commitment to guarantee their safety, where love could flourish because it was defended by someone who would never allow it to be destroyed. Elena had spent her career trying to help people through legal systems that moved too slowly to prevent harm. But watching Diego eliminate the threat that those systems had been powerless to stop, Elena understood that sometimes protection required methods that existed outside conventional morality. Sometimes keeping innocent people safe meant being willing to cross lines that good people were not supposed to cross. Sometimes love meant accepting that the person who held your heart was capable of terrible things in service of protecting everything you both held sacred. Elena was ready for all of it, ready for Diego's dangerous world and the peace it could provide for people smart enough to recognize protection when it was offered. She was ready to marry Diego Morales and build a life where Sophia could grow up believing that the adults around her were powerful enough to keep her safe, no matter what. She was ready for forever with a man who had proved that some promises were worth killing for. 6 months later, Elena stood in front of the full-length mirror in what had become her permanent bedroom, adjusting the simple white dress she had chosen for her wedding day. The dress was elegant but not elaborate, perfect for a ceremony that would be small but deeply meaningful to everyone involved. Sophia burst through the bedroom door wearing a pale pink flower girl dress that made her look like a princess. Elena had never seen her little sister so excited about anything, not even Christmas morning when their parents were still alive. "Elena, you look beautiful," Sophia exclaimed, spinning in a circle to show off her own dress. "Papa Diego is going to cry when he sees you." Elena smiled at Sophia's unconscious use of the name that had become natural over the past months. Diego had officially adopted Sophia 3 weeks after their engagement, a legal process that had required some creative paperwork, but had given Sophia the security of knowing she would never be separated from the people who loved her. "Are you ready to be my flower girl?" Elena asked, kneeling down to adjust Sophia's hair ribbon. "I have been practicing," Sophia said seriously. "I know exactly when to walk and how to throw the petals and everything. Papa Diego showed me yesterday during the rehearsal." Elena felt her heart warm at the way Sophia spoke about Diego with complete trust and affection. The nightmares had stopped completely after the final confrontation with their stepfather, and Sophia had blossomed into the confident, curious child she had been before trauma taught her to be afraid. The wedding ceremony took place in the garden where Elena had first panicked about Sophia's attachment to Diego. Looking at the small gathering of guests now, Elena marveled at how completely her definition of family had expanded. Diego's organization was represented by men and women who had become genuinely fond of Sophia, who brought her small gifts and asked about her school projects with the care of devoted uncles and aunts. Maria, who had become Sophia's substitute grandmother, wept openly as Elena walked down the makeshift aisle. Carlos, Diego's head of security, stood as best man with an expression of fierce approval that suggested he had thoroughly investigated Elena's worthiness to marry his boss and found her acceptable. But it was Diego's expression that made Elena's breath catch as she approached the altar they had set up beneath the roses. He looked at her like she was something miraculous, like he could not quite believe his luck in convincing her to build a life with him. Diego wore a dark suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the intensity of his dark eyes, but Elena could see the gentleness in his expression that had convinced an 80-year-old girl to trust him with her most precious request. When the brief ceremony concluded and Diego kissed his new wife, Sophia cheered loudly enough to startle the birds from nearby trees. Elena laughed against Diego's lips, feeling happier than she had thought possible after everything they had survived to reach this moment. The reception was a celebration that would have seemed impossible 6 months ago when Elena was still trying to protect Sophia from an abusive stepfather while working within legal systems that moved too slowly to prevent harm. Now she was surrounded by people who had committed themselves to making sure her family stayed safe and happy, no matter what threats emerged from the outside world. As the evening wound down and Sophia finally succumbed to exhaustion in Diego's arms, Elena realized that every fear she had carried about marrying into Diego's dangerous world had been replaced by deep contentment with the life they were building together. 3 months after the wedding, Elena discovered she was pregnant. She had been feeling unusually tired for several weeks, dismissing the symptoms as stress from transitioning to her new role as Diego's wife and Sophia's adoptive mother. But when the fatigue was joined by morning nauseousness that made it difficult to maintain her usual schedule, Elena finally acknowledged what her body had been trying to tell her. Elena stared at the positive pregnancy test for a full 5 minutes, trying to process the implications of bringing a child into Diego's world. She had accepted the risks for herself and for Sophia, who was old enough to understand that their safety came with certain realities about how Diego made his living. But a baby would be completely vulnerable, completely dependent on their ability to maintain security without compromise. When Diego found Elena sitting on their bathroom floor holding the pregnancy test, his expression shifted from concern to wonder to fierce protectiveness in the space of a few seconds. "Are you happy?" Diego asked quietly, kneeling beside her on the marble tiles. Elena looked up into his dark eyes and realized that despite all her complicated feelings about bringing a child into their complicated world, The answer was simple. Yes, Elena said. I am happy. Scared, but happy. Diego smiled and pulled Elena into his arms, holding her with the careful gentleness that had convinced her to trust him with everything she cared about. Our child will be the safest baby in California, he murmured against her hair. I promise you that. Elena believed him. Over the past months, she had seen how Diego's organization functioned like an extended family, how children were protected above everything else, how the dangerous aspects of the business were kept completely separate from the domestic spaces where families lived and thrived. Their baby would grow up the way Sophia was growing up now, knowing that they were loved unconditionally, that their safety was guaranteed by adults powerful enough to eliminate any threat, that they could explore the world with confidence because someone was always watching to make sure nothing hurt them. Elena had found her new role within Diego's organization by developing legitimate social programs that helped families in their territory access resources and support systems. It allowed her to use her social work training while contributing to the community protection that justified Diego's authority in their neighborhoods. Children who had been struggling in underfunded schools now had access to tutoring and supplies. Families facing eviction received assistance finding stable housing. Mothers escaping domestic violence were connected with resources that helped them rebuild their lives safely. Elena was still protecting vulnerable people, but now she could guarantee that the protection would be effective rather than hoping that legal systems would move fast enough to prevent harm. When Sophia learned she was going to be a big sister, she was so excited she could barely contain herself. She immediately began planning how she would teach the baby about horses and help with feeding and make sure no one ever scared her new sibling. Watching Sophia embrace her role as protective big sister, Elena understood that their family had found its natural rhythm. They were people who took care of each other, who put family safety above everything else, who understood that love sometimes required fierce protection rather than gentle words. One evening, as Elena stood in the nursery they were preparing for the baby, Diego joined her to assemble the crib they had ordered from Italy. Do you ever think about that night? Diego asked as he sorted through hardware and instruction sheets. The night Sophia knocked on my gate? Elena smiled, resting her hand on her growing belly as the baby kicked against her palm. All the time, she said. I think about how brave she was, how desperate the situation had to be for her to walk through those neighborhoods alone. I think about how close I came to not answering the door, Diego admitted. Carlos wanted to turn her away, thought it might be a trap. If I had listened to him, if I had chosen security over curiosity. Elena stepped closer to Diego, rising up on her toes to kiss him softly. But you did answer the door, she said. You kept your promise to her, and she kept her faith in you. And somehow, everything terrible that happened to us led to everything wonderful we have now. Diego wrapped his arms around Elena, careful of her pregnant belly, and held her in the quiet nursery where their second child would soon sleep safely. Sometimes I cannot believe this is my life, Diego said quietly. 6 months ago, I was someone who protected people as a business transaction. Now I am someone who gets to come home every night to a wife who challenges me to be better than I thought I could be, and a daughter who trusts me to keep her safe, and a baby who will grow up believing that love and protection are the same thing. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes as Diego voiced the same amazement she felt every day when she woke up in their shared bed and realized that this was not a dream she would eventually have to wake up from. Over the following months, as Elena's pregnancy progressed, and Sophia started 4th grade, and Diego continued building the legitimate businesses that would eventually replace the illegal enterprises, their life settled into a rhythm that felt both extraordinary and completely natural. Elena had learned to sleep through the sounds of Diego conducting business in his study, knowing that whatever he was handling would never touch the family areas of their world. Sophia had learned to invite school friends for playdates without mentioning what her papa did for a living, understanding instinctively that some information was private. Their baby was born on a quiet Tuesday morning in spring, a healthy boy they named Gabriel after Diego's father. Sophia was the first person outside the medical team to hold her baby brother, cradling him with the careful attention of someone who understood that protecting family was the most important job anyone could ever have. As Elena watched Diego hold their newborn son while Sophia chattered about all the things she was going to teach him, she thought about the 80-year-old girl who had knocked on a cartel boss's door at midnight, because she believed he would help her. Sophia had been right to trust Diego, Elena realized. Not because he was safe in any conventional sense, but because he was someone who understood that some promises were worth everything it cost to keep them. Looking around the hospital room at her husband and her children and the family they had built from impossible circumstances, Elena knew that Sophia's midnight knock had changed all their lives in ways that none of them could have imagined. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where help came from the most unexpected source? Where someone you never thought you could trust turned out to be exactly the protector you needed? Sometimes the most dangerous people in our lives turn out to be the ones who love us enough to fight for our safety, no matter what it costs them. Sometimes a little girl's desperate faith in someone's goodness can transform everyone involved, creating the kind of family that survives anything because it is built on absolute commitment to protecting each other. Sometimes the knock on the door at midnight is not a threat to be feared, but the beginning of everything you never knew you were looking for. Elena Morales, former social worker turned cartel wife and mother of two, had learned that safety was not about avoiding danger. Safety was about being loved by someone powerful enough to eliminate any threat to your happiness. Safety was about building a family with someone who would never let anything hurt the people he had chosen to protect. Safety was about answering the door when desperate children knocked at midnight, because sometimes courage and protection find each other in the most unexpected ways. And sometimes, Elena thought as she watched Diego teach Sophia how to hold her baby brother properly, the most dangerous man in the city becomes exactly the father your children need, exactly the husband you never dared to hope for, exactly the protector your heart was seeking all along.